This presentation is the fourth in a multi-part series covering the entire advanced planning document process. Together, these presentations cover all the rules and guidance for state agencies to get the approval and the funding that you need from the Food and Nutrition Service to carry out an information system project. The modules can be viewed independently, depending on your needs, but they'll make the most sense when viewed in the order on this slide. The processes, requirements, and terminology build on each other in each subsequent module. Finally, there is information at the end of this presentation on how to contact us if you need more information or assistance. Welcome to the APD process session on RFPs and procurement. These are the things we'll cover in this session. The power of the RFP. It's how you get what you want. The importance of open competition and avoiding conflicts of interest. The essential components of an RFP. The importance of being clear and specific. Choosing meaningful contractor selection criteria. The importance of balanced scoring. And using the contract to protect your interests. But before we get into the meat of the topic, I'm going to provide you with a few pieces of background or explanatory information. First, a lot of different terms are used by different states or organizations to mean a competitive bidding procurement process. Invitation for bids, request for bids, invitation for proposals, request for quotations. We're going to use RFP, or request for proposals, for our purposes to mean any of these. Throughout this session, we're going to be talking a lot about contractors. Contractors can fill a variety of roles in a project, so RFPs may come up throughout the system development lifecycle. Although the guidance applies to all of these, we'll be talking primarily about contracting for planning, transfer, or development and implementation. But we will touch on why you may or may not want to combine some contracted functions. For those of you not familiar with one of the terms on this screen, IV&V, it means independent verification and validation. This is a specialized service in which an independent third party reviews the outcomes or results of a project. Before you decide you may not really need to pay attention to all of this, you might need to know the dollar thresholds at which your procurements are subject to F&S approval. In SNAP, if you plan to procure services competitively, F&S will have to approve the RFP and contract for anything over $6 million. If you hope to sole source a contract, the threshold is lower, $1 million. In WIC, the threshold requiring F&S approval is $100,000 for any acquisition, competitive or sole sourced. In both programs, all amendments are subject to approval as soon as any amendments cumulatively exceed 20% of the value of the base contract. When a state agency submits an RFP, contract, or amendment for review, F&S has 60 days to respond. Every state agency's project is important, and they're all on a schedule. It's safest to plan your project timeframe with adequate federal review time in mind, at least 60 days for each document. We're held accountable for that. So now let's get back to the interesting stuff. When you're beginning the process of getting a new computer system, it's like setting off on a journey. It's going to be a long journey, and you are going to need lots of people. So you are going to need 3 ships. When you are responsible for spending federal dollars, millions of dollars, you have to have a strong commitment to stewardship. In addition to F&S, you are accountable, directly or indirectly, to auditors, to Congress, to the public, and to the press. You are accountable to department heads, the legislature, and other internal authorities. In WIC, to some extent, you're accountable to your state peers. Funding is a zero-sum game in WIC. Since it's a limited grant program, every dollar that is wasted in one state is basically at the expense of others who might have been able to use it more effectively. Partnership is critical. Projects are all about partnerships with your procurement office, your technology experts, your program policy experts, your financial people, your advocacy groups, with FNS, and more. And some of the most important partnerships are with your contractors. You'll work with them more closely than you could ever imagine. But the most important ship in your fleet, your flagship, is ownership. You own this project. You can hire one contractor to help you plan it, another to be your project manager, another to build it for you, another to monitor the quality of the results, and so on. But you still have to own it. Yes, you hire contractors because you don't have the time, the skills, the staff, the resources to do all these things yourself. If you knew how to build a system, or to do testing, or to write federally approvable documents, you wouldn't have to hire them. You do need them. You do have to rely on them. But you can't turn over the helm of the ship to them. When a state sets up a web of contractors and then thinks that all of that expertise will take care of itself and look out for the state's interests, that's when the projects start to sink. So we're going to talk in this session about how to write your RFPs and handle the procurement process in a way that helps you keep control of your flagship, helps you keep ownership of your project right from the start. Okay, so you don't have to have all the knowledge and skills that your contractors do, but you do have to have enough knowledge, expertise, and confidence, and backing to know what you want, describe it accurately, this is what goes into your RFP, recognize what resources you'll need to hire. This means having a clear and complete grasp of what resources, skills, and strengths you already have. You can't hire a contractor to fill the gaps in your knowledge and resources if you don't have any idea where those gaps are. Describe them accurately. If you can't describe the skills you expect your contractor to have, choosing one is like pin the tail on the donkey, blindfolded. Recognize when a contractor has it. This means meaningful selection criteria, a logical point system, correct weights for each of your criteria, and a selection team that is trained and committed. Use the tools you created. You're going to put careful legal wording into your RFP and contract, along with a lot of time and a little blood. All that work and blood and legal language is there to protect you. Write it as if you were going to need it, and when or if you do, use it. Don't get me wrong, all the things that you want are what contractors have to achieve in order to make a profit. If you aren't happy, if your executives aren't happy, if your project isn't a success, then they can't market that success to other customers and win more contracts and make more profit. Good companies know that your success is their success, but they are a company, not a nonprofit, for a reason. They are not in business to reduce your risk. They are not in business to feed America. You are. They are in business to make a profit at planning or developing or implementing or evaluating computer systems. Don't confuse your goals with theirs. You can be sure they won't. They are your partners, and they want that to be a successful partnership as much as you do. But they will never lose sight of their objective. Don't lose sight of yours, and don't forget that theirs and yours are not the same thing. Just for the record, while we're talking about what everybody wants, we are your partners too. We are on the same side as you. It is our job to feed America. What we want is fair and open competition, stewardship of federal funds, a process that results in access and integrity in benefit delivery, a process that holds up to legal challenges, and evidence that you are in control of your destiny, that you are keeping ownership of the project. Throughout this presentation, you'll see this nice green graphic to point out all the places where open competition is in danger during the procurement process. The RFP is about getting what you want. If you don't do it right, you likely won't get what you want. First, let's distinguish between a planning RFP and a development, transfer, or implementation RFP, or any of the others that come later in the process. A planning RFP is used to hire professional services to help a state agency plan the project thoroughly, prepare the required documents, and secure state and federal approval. The RFP for planning services may be the only one you really do have to write yourself. You can't hire somebody to write it for you without doing some kind of procurement like an RFP. But this is a good thing because an RFP for planning services is a lot simpler than an RFP for the development or transfer of a whole system. It's good practice for you to understand how an RFP needs to be structured, what you need to include, how to describe your needs and requirements carefully, and how to select a contractor. You'll work with your procurement office and other stakeholders and establish the relationships that will become even more critical when you get to the bigger procurements. There is a possible exception to the DIY approach. States usually have a list of contractors or suppliers that have already been through a competitive process and been pre-qualified to provide products or services through a master contract or task order system. This is a good time to talk about them so that we can clarify how they can and cannot be used in federally funded procurements. You can use a blanket purchase agreement or master contract if it was competitive in the first place, if the original solicitation included this type of work, and if it had appropriate limits on scope and cost, and your desired task falls within those limits. These types of contracts are commonly used for relatively small tasks, like helping you write an RFP. You shouldn't use a BPA or master contract if it wasn't competitive but was just a process where businesses could sign up on a list, or if it was for services unrelated to the task you need. Blanket purchase agreements or master contracts are rarely meant for major procurements. So you may not have to write that first RFP to get a planning contractor yourself, but beware of conflicts of interest. You cannot choose a contractor off your master agreement list, for example, to write an RFP for professional services and then allow them to bid on that RFP. Similarly, you can't have one contractor write the requirements, specifications, roles, or tasks, or the whole RFP for other contracted roles such as development contractor, QA contractor, or project manager, and then bid on those jobs. They would clearly have an unfair advantage. There are really about two ways to protect against conflict of interest in contracting roles. The first is you can describe all the roles in the initial procurement so that all bidders have equal opportunity to bid on the whole package. This can be tricky. Can you imagine why? Because at the very beginning, before you've even hired a planning contractor, you don't know yet how your project is going to go. You don't know how big it will be, the scope, the time frame, the cost. You started out needing a planning contractor to help you figure that out, right? But how can you know now what services you might need later from a project manager or a QA contractor or a business process consultant or whatever? How can you accurately define your needs now for roles that come later when you haven't planned your project yet? It can be done, but it requires a lot of homework on your part to define your needs accurately before you really know where your project is headed. And quite honestly, it just looks like you may be trying to hand the whole thing over to somebody else to run it all for you, handing over the helm of the ship. A better option is to keep it easy. Make it clear in the first procurement that the winning contractor will help define other roles and responsibilities, tasks, and functions that they will not be eligible to bid on. Just remember, the same contractor should never define the work and then bid on it, or do the work and then evaluate it. So let's summarize what we know so far. First, FNS thresholds and the 60-day review time, the importance of project ownership, how an RFP is the path to getting what you want, the allowable uses of a master contract or blanket purchase agreement, the pitfalls of conflicts of interest, FNS's obsession with open competition. Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what goes into an RFP. A few slides back, we had the purpose of a planning RFP. Now we're going to talk about an RFP for development or transfer and implementation. An implementation RFP is used to hire professional and technical skill sets to design a new system, write or adapt software, produce documentation, and test and implement the system. The things we've said about fair and open competition and conflicts of interest apply to any RFP. But now, as we go through the discussion about what should be in an RFP for transfer or development and putting together a quality document, you can keep in mind how these things would be slightly adapted if you were writing an RFP for planning or for QA or for other kinds of consultative services. Okay, let's get started. We have 5 slides of components, the groups or types of information that should be in an RFP. You can keep track of where we are by the big numbers in the lower right on the slide. The first components are the introduction and overview. This is where you provide vendors the background on your state and your system, including your current processing environment, not just your technical environment, but also your operating environment, how you do business. Tell them who you are, what your mission is, how you do business, where you operate, who you serve, what your product is, and how you deliver it. And of course, the technical picture, what the operating system is, the database platform, applications used, hardware configuration, and any components that must remain compatible with a new system. Tell why you need to replace it. Be clear and specific. Provide workload data, statistics of online transactions, volumes of regular and peak loads, how many workers, how many customers, how many on the system at the same time, how many transactions per minute, hour, or day, how big is the current database. Estimates for incremental growth over the life of the new system are a good idea. And you'll describe as much as you can about the new system environment that you have in mind. What operating system, architecture, and database platform you want. Do you want it web-based? Do you want it housed in your central data center? Be as specific and descriptive as possible about any known or expected features of the new system environment. The next component is the solicitation instructions and conditions. Terms and conditions, often referred to as the boilerplate language, are the legal and purchasing requirements. Note that there are some specific required federal terms in addition to those required by your state. The proposal structure and content describe how you want vendor proposals to be organized so that you can easily compare apples to apples, including the appearance and structure of the proposal itself, as well as attachments, supplements, and other supporting documentation you want. This section should also provide a detailed procurement schedule. A rough idea of the schedule for the whole project comes later. This section includes the process for how vendors may submit questions and how answers or RFP amendments will be distributed. And it includes the specific process vendors must follow to submit their proposals for evaluation. The third major component is the statement of work. This is where you have to devote serious time and effort to describing what you want in a new system, how you want it to look and function, what you expect your contractor to do, and what defines a successful outcome. You say how long you think it should take and why. You define the level of professional staff you expect to get and your requirements for key contractor staff. You outline all the tasks you want done, not just the deliverables, but the performance requirements in addition to concrete deliverables. You don't have to start from scratch. You can't copy another state's RFP, but you can learn a lot by reading and adapting if you don't know where to begin. And you can use another state's detailed functional design document as a guide, too, if there is a specific state model that you'd like to transfer or adapt. And here's an important aspect of looking at another state's RFPs. Don't just look at their system, look at their process. Ask other states if they got the results they originally asked for, with relatively few change orders, close to their original budget and schedule, or if they won any disagreements or even legal battles that occurred during the process. If they did all that, it means they wrote a strong, accurate RFP, managed their project well, and enforced the terms of their contract. Remember that a state with a system that looks like what you want may not be the same state that had a really strong process. You may need to look at more than one model for good ideas. Before we go on, I want to take just a minute to talk about the Functional Requirements Document, or FRED. You may recall the discussion of the Functional Requirements Document from the session on IAPDs. And remember, I just said that you can learn a lot from looking at other states' RFPs, but it's extremely important to adapt other examples to your needs. The FRD is where you describe all of the inputs into your system, the processes, and the outputs. And while it's true that there are a lot of similarities among states, just as there are a lot of FREDs in the world, none of them is exactly like you. In WIC, there's the model FRED provided by FNS. It's also not exactly like you. If you just use the model FRED, it won't be specific enough about your requirements. The world is full of FREDs. Be sure that your functional requirements document describes your state's needs. So here are some really basic examples of typical tasks for a development and implementation contractor. This isn't a complete list, just a sample. Most of these would be broken down into specific subtasks and deliverables. The statement of work is just as important if you are hiring consultant services, such as planning or QA. But instead of the work being conversion and testing, it would be things like developing the risk management plan. The list of tasks or deliverables would be specific and unique to the type of RFP. Here's a clue. If you can't describe what you want, you are not ready to issue an RFP. If you find yourself or your planning contractor preparing an RFP with a lot of vague language about efficiency and effectiveness and better management tools and better customer service, and that leaves it up to the vendors to tell you what's best for you, you are not ready to issue an RFP. Those things are outcomes, and yes, you need those in there too, but they are not concrete requirements, tasks, deliverables, and functional and technical specifications. Remember that slide. If you don't do it right, you likely won't get what you want. If you can't clearly articulate these things, you'll still get a system, but it won't be the system you need at the price you can afford. It may be the system that your planning contractor is most familiar with, so that's what they described in the requirements. Or it will be the system with the flashiest, most impressive proposal. Or it will be the system with the lowest price, and all that that may imply. Here's another clue. Don't rely on vendors to ask questions during the Q&A phase of the process to clarify anything that you didn't describe well. Some will, and that Q&A process is an important step in the procurement, but others will simply bid the product that they already have in another state. Others will fill in your gaps with guesses. And still others will simply bid high enough to cover the unknowns you left in your requirements. That's called the confidence factor. The less confidence they have that they understand your specific needs, the more padding they build into their bid. We'll come back to these in a moment. But you can't blame them. What else are they supposed to do if they can't tell from your RFP what you want? So what, you ask? What are the risks of not being specific enough? Why can't I let the bidders propose options? The industry has the experts, right? You've heard the expression, pay me now or pay me later. If you let vendors tell you what you need, There is a 100% chance that when you get into the actual process of going over your requirements and defining your system functionality during the design process, you will start to realize what you really want and need, and your project will be awash in change orders. That fixed price contract that you signed will be only the beginning of what you'll pay when you start to figure out what you really need, since you didn't know up front. Now, I want you to picture the creepiest character you know. A Dementor for you Harry Potter fans? Maybe Gollum for Lord of the Rings fans? The cat lady down the street? Now, whatever your creepiest image is, picture that creep carrying away all your money. That, my friends, is scope creep. And that is what happens when you aren't clear and detailed in your RFP and later in your requirements definition. If your project runs way over budget, scope creep is often to blame. Sometimes scope creep is easy to recognize. Sometimes it's not. And it's an important part of keeping control of your ship. Okay, back to the components of an RFP. We've talked about 3 components so far. The first group was the introduction and overview. The second was the solicitation instructions and the terms and conditions. The third was the statement of work. Now we're at the 4th group, the management plan. This is where you outline the roles and responsibilities for both state and contractors, and what the process will be for holding contractors accountable for their work. Who will the contractor report to? How often you expect formal and informal reporting? Any specific reporting tools or methods you want? How their work and deliverables will be evaluated and the basis on which they'll be paid. And you'd ask bidders, as part of their proposal, to tell you their management plan, how they manage their projects, their staff, their internal reporting structure, their tracking tools, etc. When talking about the management plan and making your expectations clear to potential bidders, we highly recommend that you outline your expectations for performance, not just deliverables. Performance criteria may include things like the quality and consistency of communication that you expect, timeliness of responses, transparency of process, and so on. It's comparatively easy to describe a concrete deliverable. It's a little harder to describe expected performance, but it's just as important. Plan to provide clear, specific, and frequent feedback to your contractor on performance criteria, along with reviewing and accepting deliverables. Finally, the 5th set of components. Clearly explaining your evaluation criteria is essential so bidders know what it will take to get this contract. Your criteria needs to be balanced and should support what you said your requirements were. For example, it wouldn't make any sense to say in the solicitation instructions that you want to see resumes for every level of staffing assigned to the project, right down to the janitor in their data center, and then assign no points to professional experience. Or requiring references of previous customers and then assigning no points at all to that element. This is an important point. No matter how good or bad a proposal is, you cannot rank a vendor up or down in your evaluation of them on the basis of things that were not in your evaluation criteria. Explaining the evaluation and award process in your RFP includes identifying your evaluation criteria, specifying the weight or points for each one, describing the scoring process, specifying the minimum technical score that it will take to win, and explaining how bidders will be notified of the outcome. As you're thinking about how to draft your RFP, remember that some of the documents that you created earlier in the planning process are used again and again throughout the project lifecycle. They don't just sit on a shelf after you've done all that work. We've just talked about 2 of them. The functional requirements document has at least 4 lives. It first appears in your state planning documents and in your IAPD, where you described what you want your system to do as part of getting state and federal approval. Next, It shows up in your RFP, where it lets potential contractors know the same thing, what you want your system to do. You should see it reflected in the proposals you receive. Vendors will use it to prepare their proposal and prove they understand your project. Finally, in your development process, you'll use your functional requirements as a starting point to make sure that your contractor is designing and building what you asked for. The application design will be based on it, and later, even your test plan will relate back to your requirements. Another document that has 9 lives is your management plan. In your IAPD, you first described roughly your state's approach to managing the project and your expectations for your contractor's management. In the RFP, you went into more detail about what you expect from vendors in terms of managing the project overall, including staffing, reporting to you, project management tools and methods, and so on. In their bids, they will propose their project management approach back to you in response. You'll agree on the details, and it will become part of your contract. Later, that's what you'll hold them accountable to. So the things that you're creating right from the beginning go on to actually guide and govern your project. We've covered a lot of material, and we still have a ways to go. So let's summarize a few guidelines for a good RFP. Do ensure that RFPs contain enough detail to clearly define requirements. Do describe requirements and timeline expectations in specific terms to provide the contractor with adequate information to develop a responsive bid. Do describe acceptable levels and measures of performance for products and deliverables. Holding back a small percentage of the payment for each deliverable until all performance targets are met is one way to hold the vendor accountable for results. Do assign people with enough technical expertise to the evaluation panel. Do allow them enough time to read the proposals carefully and score them fairly. Do provide them with training on how the selection process works and what the selection criteria mean. Beware of groupthink. My definition of this is when everybody in the group assumes that somebody else has more time, more expertise, or more technical or project understanding than they do. Let's say you're on the team and you notice something that might be a problem when you're evaluating bids or when you're reviewing a deliverable, but you don't say anything because you think it's just you. You didn't really have time to read this carefully, or you just don't think that you're very smart about this aspect of the project. So you let it go. You know that if it was really important, somebody else would notice it and bring it up. But what if everybody's doing that? What if everybody is not bringing up their fears or concerns or questions because they don't want to be the one to slow down the process, or because they think it will make them look stupid, or because they think that's somebody else's territory? Don't assume that the group will catch a problem. You are the group. Do describe the performance criteria and other relevant requirements of the procurement. Don't specify a brand name product. Provide specifications that a variety of products might meet unless there is a specific, documented state standard for this product. Don't place unreasonable requirements on firms to qualify to do business with you. Can you think of an example of an unreasonable requirement? Unreasonable requirements might be things like requiring the whole project team to be located in your city when programmers can work anywhere. Don't specify geographic requirements, requiring that the company be incorporated or based in your state. Don't shorten the bidding period to make up for other schedule shortfalls. If your bidding period is too short, vendors won't bid, either because they don't have time to develop a good proposal, or because they assume the procurement is wired and you don't really want others to bid. Don't require unnecessary experience. What would be an example of requiring unnecessary experience? How about requiring 10 years experience in WIC or SNAP systems as a minimum pass-fail requirement? What would be wrong with that? What if you require 10 years and nobody bids because all of the contractors who are interested have 7 or 8 or 5 or 9 years? Don't make something a pass-fail minimum requirement that should be on a points scale. Sure, give more points for 10 years of experience than for 2, but don't require an unnecessary minimum. We'll come back to this point in a minute. Don't include unlimited liability clauses. Almost no vendor will accept those terms, or they'll charge you accordingly. The risk in any project is shared, and the state can use more affordable tools to manage risk. Finally, a few more don'ts related to non-competitive practices and conflicts of interest. These are all about keeping the bidding process fair and open. Don't allow price collusion. Don't permit conflicts of interest. Don't allow non-competitive awards. And don't take arbitrary actions. Make sure your process is fair and transparent. Now, let's come back just for a moment to this question of unreasonable requirements for bidders. We talked about requiring 10 years of experience. There's nothing wrong with wanting strong experience from your contractor or with hiring a contractor with the most experience, but that's different from requiring a specific number of years of experience. Can you see the difference? As I explained a few moments ago, if you require 10 years, then really good contractors with only 8 years cannot bid, and you could be missing out on the best offer. Or you could get bidders with 10 years experience, but whose other qualifications are risky. So number of years of experience is something that should be scored. More points for more experience, less points for less experience, and calculated in with other qualifying factors. It would be a mistake to make a specific number of years a mandatory criterion or minimum mandatory requirement. Let me give you an example to clarify what kinds of things should be mandatory and what kinds of things should be scored with different amounts of points. Minimum requirements should be absolute, non-negotiable, non-qualitative requirements. If they can have a range of acceptable skill or experience, if you can count it or measure it, it should be a scored factor with more points for better qualifications. But for things that they either have them or they don't, those are your minimum mandatory requirements. For example, if you were hiring a nanny for your children, your minimum requirements might be that applicants must be at least 18, must have a driver's license, have no arrests or convictions, must be able to read, and must have taken CPR class. These are yes/no questions. Either she has them or she doesn't. Without them, you won't evaluate the nanny's qualifications any further. In the world of RFPs and procurements, a proposal that doesn't meet your minimum mandatory requirements is called non-responsive, and you wouldn't read any further. This is really important because your team could spend days reading a poor proposal long after it's obvious that it couldn't possibly meet your needs because you didn't define your mandatory minimums. If you did, you can throw out a non-responsive bid and move on. Many RFPs say in the boilerplate language that the state reserves the right to throw out non-responsive bids, but then they don't say what constitutes non-responsive. You have to spell it out. Then, once you have candidates that have met these minimum requirements, you will go on to evaluate the things that demonstrate skill, experience, understanding of your needs, and so on. These are the things that each candidate will have a different amount of, things you can count or measure, and you will need to score accordingly. Years of experience, number of children supervised at one time, experience with children the same age as yours, references from a previous employer, and years of formal education. These are qualitative and quantitative and can be measured. The scores for each of these will vary, and you'll decide which qualifiers are most important to you, but you didn't throw somebody out based on one of these factors. This is not saying that all experience is the same, or that experience is the same as education. You'd award more or less points for qualifications in each factor. The best candidate will win if your criteria are fair. You already practice this with almost any hiring or purchase decision in your own life. When you're shopping for a new car, You have mandatory minimum requirements in mind, that it must be big enough for your size family, for example, and scored criteria in mind, maybe a range of acceptable gas mileage, with more points awarded for better mileage. Now, what about the money? We haven't really talked about that yet. A few states have a requirement to go with the lowest bidder. That can lead to some unfortunate consequences. Because, as we all know, price is not always the best indicator of value. Price is only one factor in choosing the right contractor. Price has to be balanced against technical score, or you can end up with some very unpleasant results. We're going to do some specific scoring examples. When you're looking at the next few slides, it's very important to remember that a high cost score means a low price. They get a higher score, more points for a lower price, right? All right, if you say that technical score, things like contractor qualifications, experience, staff, management plan, etc., is so important that you give it 90% of the available points in your scoring system and give price only 10% of the weight, what can happen? Think about it. A vendor with the highest technical score will win no matter how much he's charging. What about the opposite? What if your state is on a tight budget and you say that price is the most important factor? Not the only factor, but the most important. So you give price 80% of the weight in your scoring system. What can happen? Right. A vendor with the lowest price will win no matter how lousy his proposal is. So when you are making up your scoring criteria and deciding how much of the weight or available points to assign to price, you have to test your math and make sure that you haven't allowed price or technical score to be so strong that the highest technical score or the lowest price is a slam dunk, no matter how the other scores turn out. When you are deciding how much weight to assign to cost and technical proportions of the scoring, test your math. Run a few pretend scenarios. Think you might like to weight them 50-50? Try making up some possible scores with strong and weak proposals and high and low bids and see what you get. Test each of these possible scenarios, comparing high and low scores for technical and cost components. It's a real eye-opener. Let's do an example. Now, remembering that a high score for cost means that they gave you a good price. Look who wins here. When our scores are weighted with 70% of the available points going to technical and 30 of them going to cost. The bidder in the upper left wins. He didn't have the highest technical score, but it was pretty high, and he had a good cost score, though not the lowest price. But combined, this bid had the highest score overall. So this might mean that the balance of points for technical score and cost was pretty good. Now let's look what happens when you shift the weight. Now we've reversed the weights and made only 30% of the points available for technical score and 70% of the points for cost. Look what happens. Upper right has the highest technical score, so he might be who you'd like to hire. But ooh, look, he also had a low cost score. His proposal was really expensive. So then maybe you'd like to hire the company with the next highest technical score. His price was pretty good. He got a pretty high cost score. But wait, he doesn't win either. The vendor in the lower right wins, even though he had the lowest technical score, because he was also the lowest bidder. He wins because price was weighted so heavily. Yikes. Okay, so here's a summary of how you want to structure your selection criteria. First, you define your mandatory minimum criteria, those things that are absolutely not negotiable, like in our nanny example. If bidders don't have those things, their bids are non-responsive and you don't evaluate any further. Next, you should consider requiring a minimum technical score. This means that if a proposal doesn't get at least a certain minimum score on the technical evaluation, you won't consider it further either. You never even open the cost proposal. This can be extremely valuable, especially if you are in a state that requires you to take the low bidder. Most states that require you to accept the low bid say you must accept the lowest responsive bid. If you put in your requirements that a proposal must get a minimum technical score in order to be considered responsive, you're protected. Let's take a look back at our example. What would have happened here if the state had used a very cost-heavy scoring system, like this one, with 70% of points for the cost score, but had at least a minimum technical score requirement of, say, 200? That would throw out the two low scores. And the state would be able to choose the offer with the better balance of scores. Continuing with that example, where the bottom two offers were thrown out because they didn't get a minimum technical score of at least 200 out of 300 points, look who the winner is, in the upper left. Because even though this one didn't have the absolute highest technical score or the absolute lowest cost, it had the best balance of those two scores, and the state was protected by a minimum technical score requirement. It was able to throw out the two bids on the bottom of the slide because they didn't meet the minimum standard of at least 200 points for technical to qualify as responsive. We recommend, you might want to write this down, 25 to 40% of the points for cost. And note, 40% is still a little high. There may be a place for it, like in a state that can balance very tight budget constraints with more flexibility with time, scope, and other state resources. A few states even have a standard required percentage for cost, but it makes a minimum technical score even more important. Now you can see why. So remember this slide. When you've chosen your scoring factors and points, test yourself. Remember when I said earlier that I'd come back to some bidding tactics to watch out for? The first one is simply stating your requirements back to you. This might be great for a psychotherapist, but not good in a contractor. Your RFP says you want a modularized approach, and their proposal says a modular approach would help your state manage the impact of funding cycles. Well, you knew that. That's why you asked for it. The proposal should show an understanding of your requirements and how to achieve them, not just parrot them back to you. Second, promising you anything you want. This is a proposal that says, essentially, we don't really understand what you want, but whatever it is, we can deliver. They aren't analyzing your needs. Third, and this is a tough one, states that don't really know what they want are especially vulnerable to this. You put out an RFP that basically says, we want a modern solution to all our problems. And a vendor says, great, we have your solution. And it feels so good because it seems like someone has read your mind. They've done all the thinking for you. What a relief. But there are some big risks here. First, they are offering you a system that was probably designed to meet some other state's needs, some state that actually did its homework. Up to a point, that's okay. The programs are a lot alike from state to state, and you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. But beware of getting what you need only at additional cost with expensive change orders. Remember that slide that said, pay me now and pay me later. If you did spell out your needs pretty clearly, and they still offer you something they already have built, you should still watch out. The vendor may be saying, well, here are your requirements, and we could do that, but let us show you what we have to offer instead. Or, we can do anything you want, but as soon as you see what we already have, we know this is what you'll want. Here's the point. If they aren't listening to you in your RFP, they may not listen to you as your contractor. Sometimes vendors do these things, simply quote your requirements back to you, promise you vaguely anything you want, or try to sell you something else because they can't tell from your RFP what you want. So if you are seeing a lot of proposals like these in response to your RFP, take a step back and consider withdrawing the RFP and reissuing it with better clarified requirements. I know what you're thinking. Withdraw and reissue after all the time we've invested so far? Are you kidding? My boss would boil me alive. Why would I want to do that? If you accept a bid that offers a brilliant solution that seems to solve all your problems, but it is not what you asked for in your RFP, other vendors can protest. They'd be able to make a valid case that if they'd known that's what you wanted, they would have bid on that, but you didn't say that. Sure, they might lose. Sure, you could end up with the contractor you wanted in the first place. Sure, your Attorney General might be able to find that one little clause in your RFP that says something vague and flexible about the right to negotiate or the right to choose whatever is in the state's best interests. Yep, you could win. But do you have time for that? If you don't have time to write your RFP carefully in the first place, or time to withdraw it and reissue it when you see that you didn't get the proposals you needed, then you don't have time to become best friends with your Attorney General and sit in hearings. We aren't saying that you can't take advantage of innovative ideas from the marketplace. It is okay for vendors to improve upon your requirements. The vendor who can best understand your needs and your ideas and show how they can make the most of them is the winner. Just make sure that you aren't asking a vendor to do your thinking for you and that you are keeping ownership of your project. You shouldn't be doing an ILSA. Do you know what an ILSA is? Remember that wonderful scene in Casablanca when Ilsa goes to see Rick late at night, and after they talk, she's more conflicted than when she arrived. Finally, she says, "I can't think any more, Rick. You'll have to do the thinking for both of us." Great movie, great line. Bad way to choose a contractor. So you've tossed out any proposals that don't meet your minimum mandatory requirements, like no convictions for insider trading by the CIO. And you've tossed out any that didn't get at least a reasonable minimum technical score. Now, finally, you are ready to open the cost proposals, score them, do the math, and choose your winning bidder. Congratulations! Need ideas for what some of your selection criteria might be? Again, look at what other successful states have used, and see what FNS's Handbook 901 has to offer. Check it out. See Handbook 901 on our website. Chapter 6 is on procurement, and look for criteria for evaluating proposals. Whew, are we done yet? Sorry, no. One more thing. Contracting. Writing a contract is so important. It's your protection. It may seem like a lot of legalistic boilerplate jargon, but FNS sees all the time how important your contract language is. It's this document that will protect you against poor performance by your contractor and give you the tools you need to protect the investment that you're making. You went to great lengths to choose the right contractor. Now don't lose your steam before you finish putting into place a strong contract. Your best resource is your state's procurement office. No doubt they have a basic contract that nearly everyone starts with and can help you adapt and shape it to your specific project. Again, look to other states who've succeeded in enforcing the terms of their contracts for good examples. And of course, turn to Handbook 901. The procurement chapter in 901 is full of goodies. It gives you specific terms and conditions and what they mean. It includes a checklist of some basic boilerplate language that should be in your contracts. It gives you a great idea of what FNS will be looking for when we review and approve your contracts, like the federal license clause, yes, we have a required one, and the order of precedent that protects you if there's a discrepancy between documents. Go read this part before you start editing the standard language from your procurement office or drafting a contract from scratch. Finally, if your IT services are provided by another state agency, many of these same guidelines for RFPs and contracts apply to your service agreement with that office. It should resemble a contract in many ways. These are the things we said you'd learn in this session. How'd we do? I hope you feel more confident about tackling the procurement process. If you're following these training sessions in order, your next stop will be the unit on APD updates. In addition to these training modules, please visit the FNS Handbook 901 or some of the other great content on the FNS APD website. There's also contact information there for the State Systems Office, or you can reach us through your FNS regional office if you need more information or assistance. We know training takes an investment of your time. Thank you for spending some time here today, and good luck with your project.